Okay, so you've installed our ACS3 coil conversion kit. You love our ACS3 coil conversion kit, but for some reason it doesn't seem like it has that fresh performance like when you first installed it. Well, today we're going to go over a little tech tip to breathe a little life back into your ACS3 coil kit. Okay, so found on each one of our ACS3 coil springs is this heat shrink tubing. The heat shrink tubing is just there to quiet the spring down. We have a metal spring sitting inside of a metal fork tube, and as the spring's compressing up and down and moving around, it can clack off the sides of the tube, causing noise. This is just to provide a nice buffer to quiet things down. That being said, over time, this heat shrink can actually break down. And so today we're just going to go through a quick little tip to show you how to replace this heat shrink tubing and breathe a little bit of life back into your fork. Okay, so we just talked about how this heat shrink can sometimes swell or migrate, causing extra friction inside the fork or causing the kit to not work to its potential. So what we're going to do, we have a fork here with an ACS coil kit installed. We're simply going to take our push 32mm chamferless socket. Once the air bump stop is completely unthreaded, we're simply going to pull it straight up and remove it, along with any plastic spacers you may have based on your kit and the amount of preload that you have. Simply set that aside. Now we're going to pull this fork spring out. And I can tell already by looking at it that the heat shrink has migrated. It's moved too far up the spring. This can cause excess noise, and I can also see that this one isn't perfectly tight anymore, so it can rattle around in there. So being swollen and migrating will cause friction and cause excess noise. So we're going to go ahead and use a small razor blade, and we're going to cut this existing heat shrink off and simply install a fresh set. We've got our new heat shrink. There's nothing special about it, it's just a thin heat shrink. It's available through our website, but to be honest, you can use any heat shrink that's available from a local supplier, even maybe your automotive store. Because we use the same spring in both 35 and 36mm stanchion forks, we have an extra band. So on RockShox forks, we use the single clear piece on the fork spring. On Fox forks, we use the clear band, and then we have this white band that wraps around that gives it a little bit extra diameter to keep it even quieter inside the 36mm fork tube. So this is in a RockShox, so it's a 35mm, so just the single band. So we're simply going to take just a basic razor blade, and we're just going to kind of gently cut down through the heat shrink to break it open. Okay, so now that we've successfully cut off the old heat shrink, I'm simply going to take a little cleaner. You can use some Simple Green, or we use contact cleaner. I'm just going to spray a little bit of that on the spring to clean off any excess oil or grease. It'll just help for making the heat shrink stick a little bit better. Now that I've cleaned that off, I'm just going to take my single piece of heat shrink, slide it on over the spring. You really want it to be about in the middle of the spring. So anytime you take your fork spring out and it's not quite in the middle, that is a sign that it may have migrated. Okay, so now that the heat shrink is in the middle of the spring and in position, we're simply going to apply some heat and cause it to shrink so that it's actually sticking onto the tube. You can do this in a number of ways. We're going to use a little heat gun today. You can use a propane torch, a lighter. You can even hold it over your open flame of your stove in your kitchen. Hair dryers generally don't have enough heat to do it, but maybe you have a super powerful hair dryer you can use. So we're simply going to take our heat gun, turn it on. The key is to not apply too much heat too quickly. So we just literally want to keep working this around, and you can see as we're applying the heat, you can see the heat, the shrink start to collapse up on the spring. We want a snug fit, but not a tight fit. So we want to put it into a position where the heat shrink is kind of sticking in place, but not too tight. So now that we're finished heating up the heat shrink, if it's installed properly, we want to make sure that the heat shrink is not excessively tight, but at the same time, you shouldn't be able to move it. It should be a nice balance between a snug fit and not too tight. So if you can move it, you need to add a little bit more heat. If it's nice and snug like this one here, and you can see that the heat shrink is kind of scalloped a little bit in between the coils, that's a really good fit. So for those of you who have a Fox 36 ACS kit, we're going to also add the white band. We're going to do the same technique, simply slide it over the top of the spring. We want to put it in the center of the clear band, and we're simply going to add some heat and shrink this down to on top of the clear band. The last step is we're just going to take a little bit of grease. And again, this is just to help kind of make things slippery and to quiet things down, but you can apply a bit of grease all over the fork spring. And now it's ready to just reinstall back into the fork. Okay, so we've given you a little tech tip on how to breathe a little life back into your ACS3 fork kit. As always, if you have any questions or any problems, you're always welcome to reach out to sales@pushindustries.com, 970-278-1110, or you can reach out via our online chat feature of our website, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Thanks. Take 17.